It's the disengaged, consciously aware that you are not putting your true self out there to be negated, radically accepting the circumstance and knowing that they are not capable of changing or seeing you clearly mask. That mask keeps you safe. Do they like it when we walk on eggshells? Weigh in on that. Do you think a narcissistic person likes it when we walk on eggshells, or is it annoying for them? So let's see what you think, because I got my answer. Before I give you that answer, just a gentle reminder, those of you who want to do the deeper dive into narcissistic healing, got our monthly healing program, more and more people joining, benefiting. Please join us. Hit that link in the video notes and you'll see you can really join and do more than you can do here on YouTube. So, question, do they like it when we walk on eggshells? Yep, they do. So let's go to the original question. I'm sorry, earlier question then is, why do we walk on eggshells around the narcissistic and toxic people in our lives? You drop those reasons in there too. But the classical standard ones are to avoid their rage, to appease them, to avoid feeling guilty, and to avoid their projections and their shaming. And that makes sense to me. It makes sense to any of us. Who really wants to sign up for someone to yell at them and rage at them and leave you feeling miserable? Most people are conflict averse and will do what is needed to avoid conflict. We don't want to feel bad, so we become more and more careful around these people who we're concerned that that's what's going to happen. So what is it about narcissistic people that makes it necessary for us to walk on eggshells? Things like their rejection sensitivity, their unprocessed shame, their fear of vulnerability, their delusional grandiosity, and their obsessive need to always be right, their incapability of being accountable about their faults, their short fuses. So we watch what we say, we watch what we do things the way they want them, we avoid sharing our problems, we make sure we check on what kind of day they're having before we share about our day. We study their expressions and their faces. We take the temperature of the room. We avoid sharing our needs, our wants. We learn to eat when they want, eat what they want, sleep when they want, watch what they want. We give up on ourselves. We over-monitor ourselves. And we take great pains to do things just the way they want them. We keep kids quiet. We keep pets quiet. And your kids learn to walk on eggshells too. Everyone does. If you do this at work, it means avoiding telling them bad news, doing things in the messed up, inefficient way that they want, even if it's more expensive and a big waste of time. But the question I started this video with was, do they like it when you walk on eggshells, or any of us walk on eggshells? And yes. The narcissistic folks aren't dumb. In fact, they're quite clever, right? Smart. They notice stuff. And they notice that people are being careful around them. Or that they're getting and that the narcissist knows they're getting their way. And the reason they like it is because it means they're in control. They have the power. Sometimes they may even brag about it. It can be performative, and they want people to see, I run my family with an iron fist. Look at everyone around here. They're scared of me. It's a source of pride that everyone is being so careful around them. Because the narcissistic folks have little empathy, they do not care that they are causing tension or discomfort for other people. They just like that everyone has fallen into line. So when you walk on eggshells, it's almost like a manifestation of their power. They even love the idea that they say boo and then people jump. It's the ultimate demonstration of their control. And obviously this is on a continuum. In the case of more severe narcissistic abuse with a more malignant narcissist, they may be keeping that control, and the eggshells are proliferated through the threat of or actual violence. In other cases of narcissism, our fear of shame or our belief that we only exist if we are doing what they want or are pleasing them, it's enough to keep us on those eggshells. In a way, the walking on eggshells is a reminder that if you are in a narcissistic relationship, that you are, for all intents and purposes, a hostage to them psychologically, that you basically live in psychological servitude to them. The eggshell walking is a reminder of that almost continuity between them and you, that poor boundary, where it's like one of those parasite alien movies where they have fully infiltrated your psyche and sucked it out and stuck pleasing them, right? I've been in enough eggshell walking relationships myself that I remember often wondering, doesn't this person feel bad for how wrecked I am? How much I'm exhausting myself? How sensitive they are? And then I saw, not only don't they kind of get off on the power trip that we are all their prisoners. They love that people would jump up when they entered a room. It was sort of a low-grade sadism, and frankly, it was disgusting. Obviously, in some situations, it can be unsafe to do something about it. Violent situations or coercively controlled relationships. But in others, you have to ask yourself, so what if they get angry? You do you. And if the socks are still on the floor, or the music is a little too loud, or you drop the keys, so what? They'll criticize you and berate you. Ah, you're so clumsy, you're so stupid. They're going to do it anyhow, right? If you're walking on eggshells because you think it will change them, then give it up. It's not going to work. If you're walking on eggshells to avoid their rage, I get it. But if you think they'll notice it and feel bad, that's never going to happen. You walking on eggshells isn't something where they spring up and say, oh, oops, I don't want anyone walking on eggshells for me. They like the idea that all of us are just extensions of them and living to please and convenience them. And that is a grim reminder that walking on eggshells, trying to get it perfect and right, that it's never going to win them over. It's just going to set a precedent that this tense, nervous, anxious, eggshell walking tightrope is how it's always going to be. If someone else ever pointed it out, could it bring up shame in them? I think only if they got in trouble for it. We have heard of some workplace cases where people will say, this is an incredibly abusive workplace, but even then, they don't really cop to it. They're just deeply inconvenienced and feel like the whole thing's a witch hunt and they're being victimized. So let's talk a little bit about masks today, right? We always talk about how the narcissist can be so covert and they can wear a mask. Well, guess what? The narcissistic person is not the only one wearing a mask. You want to know who else is wearing a mask in this relationship? Turns out you need one too. The aspect of narcissism that makes it so problematic and so confusing is what we know. It's their capacity for the narcissist to wear multiple masks. They're charming with new people or when they need something, charming and charismatic with high status folks, anyone that they're trying to win over or love bomb or get something from. But then behind closed doors, they will often treat those closest to them, people that they're used to or have less power, they treat them horribly. The people who only see the charming, charismatic mask think that you're the one with the problem. And their ability to mask on and mask off is how so many people often feel confused in these relationships and often find it hard to leave them because the narcissistic person in their life is consistently, in most cases, able to put on that good mask often enough to keep you confused and often keep you stuck in the relationship. The masking is why narcissistic people are often labeled as covert, meaning that they're able to hide the bad parts of the narcissism, and many people see a different side of them. And lots of people get critiqued if they were to say, for example, my mom's narcissistic or my husband's narcissistic, and other people will say, well, you shouldn't use that, you shouldn't diagnose them, maybe it's you. So here's the other side. To heal or even be in one of these relationships, the ultimate goal, obviously, is to heal, obviously, to take back your true self, the part of you that you had to silence or that was shamed or blamed or devalued or negated while you were or are in the narcissistic relationship. None of us can show up as who we really are in these relationships. And when you bring your true self into one of these relationships, you do so at your own peril. You run the risk of being shut down, diminished, and in the long run, it's not good for you psychologically, unless you are built to live in a constant state of rebellion. For most of us, the chronic negation, especially if it has been happening for a lifetime since we were children, it takes a cumulative toll, and it can magnify that sense of not enoughness that long-term survivors of narcissistic relationships endure. So to manage narcissistic relationships, you need a mask too. And there are multiple reasons for this. First, you need to keep exerting that muscle of your true self, that part of you that owns reality, that knows who you are, what you stand for, your needs, your preferences, your aspirations, and that you can't really show up in a narcissistic relationship. But you need that true self to exist, and you need to have the places and activities in your life when your true self can exist. That may be in spaces like healthy friendships, healthy workplaces, other healthy relationships, or creative pursuits, or any number of professional activities that are meaningful to you. You need those spaces. That's not a mask, that's you. And this is not an easy place for survivors to get to. In the most severe cases, when your true self is out there, you may even feel a sense of guilt or betrayal. People who have endured parental narcissistic abuse, even years out, will feel or believe that individuation is a betrayal of the narcissistic parent. That's the indoctrination. That's how deep it goes. Some people may also have a fear of embarrassment. Remaining that you that's only partially you, cutting out that true you, can be a way of strangely keeping that narcissistic parent close. As long as you are keeping part of you hidden, you're still in that relationship with your parent. The mask needs to go on when you are with the narcissistic person. It's the disengaged, consciously aware that you are not putting your true self out there to be negated, radically accepting the circumstance and knowing that they are not capable of changing or seeing you clearly mask. That mask keeps you safe. Many people will say, but if I wear this disengaged mask where I'm not really coming as my true me, doesn't that make me inauthentic when I'm with the narcissistic person? You never could be fully authentic with a narcissistic person. That's the double bind of these relationships. In fact, it may be more authentic to be clear and fully recognize to yourself that you can't be you with them. It's not good for you. And that the only way to keep your life running while you have to keep this narcissistic person in your life is to keep that disengaged mask on. And you know what? They don't really care. You are an object to them. A source of supply, a way that they regulate, a way of them looking good to the world. Something that may legitimize their life. For example, y'all look good on a Christmas card. You might be a person who does stuff for them, or a way for them to not feel alone in the world. You are only kept around as long as you can serve a function for them. And if you can be clear on that with yourself, it can save you. Listen, some narcissistic relationships are so abusive, so cruel, and so impossible that there's no way to stay in them safely. The wounds are too deep, the situation too impossible, the betrayals too awful, that there is no point. There are some narcissistic relationships that we know aren't good for us, but may represent a necessary problem in our lives. For example, someone you might have to co-parent minor children with, or an adult child or their spouse that may be the parent to cherished grandchildren, or a group of colleagues that are part of a larger institution that you actually like working in, or another family member that the family won't cut out, but there are other family members you want to see. We simply cannot eliminate all of the narcissistic people from our lives. But have that mask you need to put on as a visual. They don't get to see all of you. And when those interactions are done, give yourself a minute, because it's actually exhausting to not be yourself. Take that mask off and let your true self shine. Because sadly, narcissistic people with their many masks, they create a world where masks have become necessary. But if a mask when interacting with them means that there are other places in your life where your true self gets to shine, then it's well worth it. But if you can think of that there's some people in my life I can't cut out, and you know that's very central to my philosophy of healing, you can't get out of them at all, and I truly believe you can heal even if you're still in them. But having that visual that I'm going to have to put this mask on, that actually being true to myself means that I protect my true self. I disengage, I keep that distance, I radically accept, I know what they're about, but take that minute when you leave that interaction, do it visually. Engage in the sort of action of it, of peeling that mask off and recognizing that the rest of us want to see your true self. So, you know, you wouldn't be watching this channel otherwise. You know that in order for a narcissistic relationship to work, you have to shut yourself down. The relationship is based on your convenience to them. If you're of no convenience to them, you're not bringing anything to the table, they need something, they'll be there and they'll get it. And you learn over time in these relationships, you give it to them when they want it. And then that's when the relationship works. If they want food or sex or work or time, repairs, caregiving, anything, whatever it is, depending on the relationship. And should you give it to them when they want that thing, and if you really want to hit it out of the park with them in the relationship, you anticipate what they want and you give it to them before they even know they want it. If you can do that, well, then you've created the perfectly symbiotic, well, singular, one-way biotic narcissistic relationship. So if you sacrifice all of you and be exactly what they want to be, basically a cyborg, the relationship will work. If you were to have no feelings, no needs, no wants, no beliefs that are different than theirs at least, and if you have feelings and needs that you're good, as long as your feelings and needs are aligned with theirs and they're never different. In other words, if they're happy, you have to be in a good mood. If they're having a bad day, you need to be dejected too. And certainly make none of your needs known on those bad days for them either. If they believe something to be true, you don't contradict them. And you don't ever want to ask them for something they don't already want. Does that make sense? There is your recipe for how to make a narcissistic relationship work. But the fact is, the very things you would have to do to make a narcissistic relationship work is not good for you. And I was reading an article that led me to another article that took me to the work of someone named Dr. Dana Jack, and I wish I'd shared her work sooner on this channel. Over 30 years ago, she developed a theory called silencing the self theory. And she believed that this theory explains some of the gender differences we see in depression and may explain some of the reasons that we see the greater prevalence of depressive disorders in women. Now, her original work, again, from quite a while ago, focused on women in relationships and understanding for those women what contributed to their depression. She looked at them over time, and what she observed is that the depressed women silenced themselves. They silenced themselves so they wouldn't anger their partner or to avoid verbal abuse or even physical abuse. The more they did this, the less they were connected to themselves, and they felt lots of negative feelings about this, including shame. Basically, the women she was studying were silencing themselves to survive in these relationships or make them work, and were acting in a way that was considered to be the way a woman was supposed to act. And they did that in order to get through the days, the weeks, and the years. And while things might have seemed like they were working, inside they were feeling worse and worse, and this could and often did culminate in clinical depression. Her work takes on the idea that people who are less empowered, and her work has been women, but they're given a bill of goods on how they're supposed to be in their relationships, according to what the world tells them to be, which is basically in a gendered, binary, is that you have to give in, take care of other people, shut up, and put up. And then when a woman gets stuck in these relationships, she blames herself. Does any of this sound familiar? It should, because as I read her papers, it hit me that self-silencing is what happens in every narcissistic relationship. And since Dr. Jack is suggesting that if someone self-silences, and that's associated with depression, well, then that makes sense, doesn't it? Most people in narcissistic relationships self-silence and self-silence for a long time. And while, yes, there's a subset of people who do get angry and get into it with the narcissistic person, the vast majority of people over time self-silence. It's the only way these relationships would persist. Now, Dr. Jack's take on this idea of silencing the self takes in different patterns, including a person evaluating themselves on the basis of standards that other people hold, that caring for other people is more important than your own needs, keeping quiet about expressing yourself to keep a relationship intact, and looking happy in a relationship on the outside while being pissed off or miserable inside. Again, all of this sounds familiar to anyone who's been in a narcissistic relationship, right? These are very similar to what happens to folks in any kind of relationship with an antagonistic or narcissistic person. Not all, of course, but ultimately that over time, a person needs to silence their needs and wants and be what the other person needs them to be to avoid conflict, to stay safe. That's the core of a narcissistic relationship. And Dr. Jack was not studying narcissistic relationships per se, but is merely studying what happens to people who developed depression or had significant levels of depression and what was happening within them. Dr. Jack wasn't concerning herself with what the other person in the relationship was doing. Now, part of the reason that there's so much confusion, even in the field of mental health, but certainly for survivors, is how so much of this work on what people do themselves in relationships when they cannot safely be themselves, it all overlaps, right? But I think we can learn from these overlaps that there is something that happens to a person who has less power in a relationship and feels a social, a societal, or a personal pressure to silence themselves, to stay safe and feel safe in a relationship. The basic math is that when you cannot be your authentic self in a relationship, it's never going to be good for you. And the fact is, you cannot show up and be yourself in a narcissistic relationship. Therefore, logically, it stands that narcissistic relationships are not good for you. At least that's my take on it. Other people may disagree. Now, given the strong association of self-silencing and depression, and given that this sort of self-silencing happens in narcissistic relationships, the next part of the science puzzle is to explore those relationships more, right? Which is something we're about to do in research I'm conducting on this. The more we have the theoretical and the data support for all of this, the more we can study this and figure out what can help people in toxic relationships. Gotta stay tuned because the research is what's going to sort of turn this ship and give more attention to it. And we will feature links to Dr. Jack's research in the video notes if you're interested. And again, I'm on a science jag lately because, again, I'm pushing forward with folks on our own research into narcissistic relationship and what happens to people in them. But it's always a good idea to bring the science into this space so you can see that this isn't just sort of opinion or this is all in your head. It's very, very real. Let's talk a little bit about trust, and namely, how much your sense of trust gets so messed up by these relationships. So here's the thing. When you're in a narcissistic relationship, your relationship with trust changes forever. But it happens in two different ways, and that's what I want to break down in this video. So did you feel, or do you feel, like you will never trust anyone again after having gone through a narcissistic relationship? I'm guessing for most of you felt like, no, hell no, I'm never going to trust any of again. Now, I guess some of it relates to what happened in the relationship. You have to ask yourself, were you cheated on? Were you lied to? Did you get money taken? Were you grifted or scammed or future faked or repeatedly gaslighted or manipulated? The nature of the betrayals matters, but ultimately, not only are you betrayed, you're so psychologically turned upside down that everyone starts to seem like a con, a thief, or a liar by the time you're out of that narcissistic relationship, whether they are or they're not. And this can also happen from childhood. If you had a narcissistic parent that repeatedly made broken promises or abandoned you or always chose themselves or chose someone else, it's the same thing. You just feel like you can't trust people. If you got ripped off or scammed by a business partner or a colleague, same thing. You just don't feel like you can trust anyone. And the mistrust that comes out of being in a narcissistic relationship is different than other kinds of mistrust because it goes so deep in these relationships. Not only are you betrayed when you're in a narcissistic relationship, but you're also told that the betrayal is somehow your fault. So you stop trusting pretty much most people in the basic ways. You go into a relationship, you believe people from that point on are going to lie to you or do a bait and switch or break promises. And then you also stop trusting the decency of all human beings. You start to believe at some level that people are harmful and threatening. You pull back from spending time with them. And that goes far deeper than just thinking that a new partner is going to cheat on you. So the lack of trust that comes out of a narcissistic relationship can generalize to all relationships. When people come out of narcissistic relationships, they will find that they cannot trust anyone. And I'm sure a lot of you had that experience. You don't trust the plumber, or you don't trust that your cousin who says you'll pick you up from the airport, or you don't trust that the package that you ordered will come in one piece. You just start losing trust in everything and everyone. And that is an incredibly exhausting way to live. But then there is the far more pernicious and awful loss of trust, a different kind of loss of trust. And this is to me is worse than not trusting other people. You stop trusting yourself. People who come out of narcissistic relationships or people who are still in them still wonder, was it me? Was there more that I could have done? Am I the one who's narcissistic? You might wonder if you're a decent human being, if you are all the things that the narcissistic people said that you are. Am I bad? Am I dumb? Am I lazy, incompetent, mean? You know the laundry list of things you say about yourself, and you believe them. You stop trusting your judgment, especially if you've been in more than one narcissistic relationship, or if you've been a situation that other people saw kind of clearly as being toxic. You may think, ugh, I have no decision-making ability. I don't know how to pick them. I saw the signs and I didn't leave, or I went back. I can't trust myself. You don't trust yourself after years of being told by someone or multiple someones that you're wrong about everything. You may find yourself doubting where you put the keys, or if you packed the sunscreen, or if you put the letter in the mailbox. And you may waste lots of time in a life going back and double checking everything or asking for reassurance because you don't trust yourself. You don't trust that you remember things properly or that you did them the right way. You replay the relationship, the narcissistic relationship. And hell, even not narcissistic relationship. And you'll replay them and say, did I do the right thing? Did I say the right thing? Was I weird? And it all ends up being a double-teamed trust mess because you stop trusting other people and you stop trusting yourself. So it makes it feel impossible that you'd be able to get into new relationships, collaborate, build partnerships, or even rely on people to do small things for you. You doubt your judgment. You hold back. And listen, I get it. After enduring the mess or even the horrors of a narcissistic relationship, it's very easy to stop trusting your capacity to make a good decision or honor the signs, and to start viewing, and then you start viewing everyone as a threat or a harm or a grifter or someone who's on the make. It's easier to not trust than to take the risk of having to go through all of that again. But you are also wise enough to know that that's not a life to live like that, and that in order to have people in your life, you're going to have to make some leaps of faith. So what do you do when you're caught in this trust mess? Number one, as you figure out what narcissism is and go into new relationships, take your time. You remember my 12-month reminder when you get out of a new old relationship before you get into a new one. You need time to learn to trust others, but you got to start with yourself first. And that means taking some time with yourself, learning to trust yourself again. It means starting small, making small decisions and seeing how they turn out, and then leveling up. But it takes time, and the destruction of trust that happens in a narcissistic relationship can take a long time to rebuild. Give it the time. Don't feel like you need to rush back into relationships and prove that you can trust people again and trust big. Move slowly. Second, practice trust with people you already know and kind of trust. I hope that each of you has at least one person in your life who has not fundamentally betrayed your trust. Practice experiencing trust with that person, enlisting them to help you and seeing that they do. Trusting your judgment about having this person in your life as well. Even this won't be easy, but start small here, just like you did with yourself. Third, don't overgeneralize, as hard as it is to do that or not do that. It's easy to overgeneralize from one instance back into all this idea that all people are bad and threatening after your narcissistic relationship. And even after your narcissistic relationship, people will break your trust again, and you will make some bad choices. That's life. But one mistrustful thing that might happen with a person who's only done that once, or one breach of trust, doesn't mean that's how it always is everywhere. Learn from those things, take a look at what happened, and integrate that information. Maybe you won't trust that person again who breached your trust once. But don't leap right into this idea that this is everybody. Number 4, learn from these breaches of trust that continue to happen. Like I said, you're never going to live in a world where everyone's going to do right by you. So let's say, for example, you relied on someone to do something and they didn't do it. Break it down. Where did it happen? Catch yourself if you blame yourself. But give a long critical look at what went wrong. Figure out what can be fixed and how you go back into trusting that person, if you do. Number 5, though, is recognize that your relationship with trust may have changed in a permanent way. It may be that you now trust differently. Maybe you just do hold a little more suspiciousness. Maybe you want to do some things on your own and aren't in such a big rush to collaborate, and you're more careful. And you know what? I'm not sure that that's always a bad thing for survivors. You may meet someone new if you're dating and move very tentatively. And if they complain or are concerned that you're too tentative, you can be honest with them that trust takes a minute for you. And if they push it or push back, heed that as the red flag that it is and step back. I can say personally, as a survivor of narcissistic relationships, trust is a real problem for me. I don't trust. And it probably means my career has been held back a little. I don't trust collaborators as a rule, that relationships are very difficult for me, and I have a very, very, very tight circle of friends, and I don't go out of it. I'm also overly suspicious of new opportunities, and I never answer a phone number I don't recognize. I know it's self-protective. There's been so much hurt, so many breaches of trust, and so much disappointment I've had. And in some ways, realistic expectations that we need to navigate a narcissistic world can translate into not trusting every bright new thing that comes your way. At some level, I have to accept that as who I am, or who I've become, I guess, and what has happened to me. And instead of fighting it and trying to say, no, I'm going to be wide and open and accepting and trusting of everyone, in essence, going against my nature, I have learned, as many of my clients have learned, is that trust is a door that's ajar. It's not closed, shut, and locked, but it's also not cast wide open. Perhaps that trust door is open just enough so that you can peer out, check out the situation, feel the weather, get the facts, do your due diligence, be discerning, and then and only then you may crack the door open a little more each day. Will it ever be completely wide open? Probably not. But I'm confident that by being patient with yourself and taking the time you need, you can let in enough light through that door to slowly step into new situations and people, but tentatively and carefully, almost like a cat that's walking on an unfamiliar surface. Listen, my point of view is that if you survive the breach of trust, or breaches, many breaches of trust that have happened in your past narcissistic relationships, you've definitely learned one thing for sure. That even if it happens again, it would suck to have your trust betrayed by someone new again. It'll sting. It'll feel like breaking a leg in the same place twice. But you also learned that you did have what it took, that somehow you got to the other side. And yeah, maybe you'll open the door a little less next time, but resilience means that we do crack open that door. And even if it happens again and someone breaches your trust, you know that you've got what it takes, painful as it is, to get to the other side.